I am going to be opening up a very special invitation to our next mentorship cohort if you want to study astrology with me. And I'll probably share a full video just talking about where I'm at with the work, because I'm always changing, the work is always changing. And I'm at this place in my praxis where I don't want to compartmentalize parts of my life and cosmologies anymore, which means bringing in even more threads of animism and ancestor work into how we relate to and carry the framework of astrology. Really, the desire is to do this work together. We have to, in my opinion. I'm not interested in this hierarchical design of like, okay, the person who's leading the mentorship group has all the answers. That's so far from the truth and how I function. And in leading this mentorship group for the past few years, I have learned so much from the communal wisdom and from holding questions together, especially around the shadows, like the colonial shadows that are embedded within the astrological framework, and how we want to get at that so that we don't just perpetuate them in our interpretations, right? Because the colonial history of astrology lives deep in our bodies and in our collective psyche, but it also then lives in our understanding of the framework, in the interpretations that we inherited, and then how we read other people's charts. And so I want to interrupt that. And I don't have the answers as to how to do that, but I have some thoughts and some questions. And to me, that's where the work begins. That's where we do it together. I'm going to open the doors on the benefic conjunction, and they will close at the summer solstice. And from there, we prepare for the journey ahead. So again, all the details will be in the show notes. I just want y'all to know that that's happening. If you're interested, obviously reach out with questions. And I'll post a whole other video talking a little bit more about how I've held the mentorship cohort in the past, how it's looked, what to expect, and also how it's going to be different this time around, because I'm committed to it always being different and growing with the world as it changes. Friend, welcome back to the Altar of Stars. This is the week ahead reading for the week of June 14th, 2026, and we have a few shifts, not too much going on this week. A lot of Venus energy, and of course Chiron ingressing into Taurus is kind of a big deal, especially because it's entering rulership of Venus's terrain. So lots of heart level things to talk about here. And Venus just entered Leo over this past weekend. And so we're heading into the opening aspects of Venus in this fixed fire sign. And in some ways, I also feel that she's kind of laying the foundation. She's like putting out the stepping stones in regards to our embodiment, our body level experience of this territory. Venus tends to bring us into what it feels like to be in these different sign territories because it's so heart level. And when I say heart level, to me, that's inextricably bound to our somatic experience, our felt sense of the relational field, right? This is Venus's terrain. And so with Venus newly in Leo, our relational field is changing. The felt sense is changing. Our experience of the field and how we're navigating it is slowly shifting. And so these opening aspects that Venus is making this week with a few of the bigger powers, the bigger outer planets, that gives us a proper introduction to how it will feel to be moving in this kind of leonine terrain, this is just the beginning of welcoming that energy into the field. So I want to talk about that, but I also just want to note, I did some divination because I could feel a little bit of a sensibility around how the field is changing. And that was my strongest sense this morning as I sat down to open the space, is like, wow, okay, it's dropping from intellectually understanding or even like trying to conceptualize the ways that the field, and when I say the field, I'm speaking about like collective consciousness, the landscape of our shared reality, both in very literal material dimensions, but also in very subtle dimensions. And in my own experience and cosmologies, it's actually from the most subtle that changes take place in the material, in the most dense layer, right? If you're familiar at all with any of the Vedic cosmovision, a lot of the ways that reality is organized in that understanding of like, quote unquote, how things work, which is like a big, tall order, a big undertaking to conceptualize. I have found it helpful that in the Vedic cosmovision, there is this spectrum that applies to really all things, where we're moving from the most subtle, the most unmanifest dimension of that expression into the most dense, which by the time we get to the most dense expression of energy and consciousness, we're in material form now. And so when I say the field is changing, right, when I use this language that can sound really abstract, my felt sense of it is that there are changes occurring in the subtlest field, the subtlest dimension of reality, that we can also think about as like the air and ether element, where our mind is really projecting into that layer. But even beyond that, even more subtle than that, is beyond the reaches of the mind, right? There's transformation occurring in those very, very subtle levels that are slowly dropping in octave by octave into more dense layers, right? I feel actually called, it does feel alive to just talk a little bit more about this, because I'm realizing as I'm saying it, it's what I have been understanding about the way things are changing. So I hope it's helpful if I get into this for a minute here, because it kind of also lays the foundation for the things that I sense these planetary shifts are actually bringing through the collective body. So as I mentioned, in the Vedic cosmovision, we have spectrums of very dense material to very subtle, unmanifest immaterial, however you want to conceptualize that, right? Because the reality of like the most subtle dimension is that it is beyond concept. It is beyond the reaches of the mind. We cannot even conceptualize unmanifest reality by its very nature. It cannot be given a shape or a contour by its very nature, right? So I have a background as an Ayurvedic physician. Everything in Ayurveda is described in a spectrum of the elements, right? The elemental qualities. And the elements also exist on a spectrum of most dense to most subtle. So the earth element is the most dense. And this is how I experience also material reality. Anything in a body, anything in form, like our own body, our own physicality, and of course the manifest world around us. I'm not going to get into the semantic layer of the illusion of manifest reality, but that is, if those of you out there are familiar with this, it exists within the same fold of the conversation, that this very dense physical plane is merely a projection of consciousness in physical form. So just planting that in our awareness as I talk more here, but the earth element is the most dense, right? This is all the way into physical form, something that we can be perceived as having a body, which of course we know that everything, if you zoom in close enough, there's still space between the atoms that create the illusion of solidity, right? So there's still ether element even at this most dense form, which I think is where the whole circuit kind of folds in on itself. And really that idea of Maya, of the illusion of it all, applies here. But after the earth as the most dense, going up a notch to a little bit more subtle, is water element, the fluidity, right? Beyond that, the fire element. Beyond that, air. And then the most subtle elemental would be ether, of course. Right? So we have this spectrum of differing densities and how they all interplay in creating reality as we know it. Now, my experience of the thought forms of the mind that I'm always talking about is like, as soon as we can give something language, it has a form. As soon as we can spell or give shape to our thoughts in the form of words or even ideas, imagination, vision, all of those things have already dropped into the layer of reality that is taking form, right? To be able to even be talking to you right now and translating my ideas, there is a quality of mind that is giving form to unmanifest preconceptual reality, right? The movement from preconceptual into conceptual, that's where we drop into form itself. And I share this because if we only think about physical reality as the external world, we're missing the machinations of how that functions in our own mind. And the weight here, the weightiness of it, is that once something is able to come and create a thought form in our mind, it's already taken a shape that can become fixed, that can become a container in which we identify with something, and thus we are trapped inside of it, right? And it's important to understand, like, this too is coming, just bringing back around this brief riff on the concept of illusion. Everything that we perceive as solid material form, everything that has this matter-of-factness that we can identify with at an ego level, that we can say, that is me, that is a part of me, that is how reality works. These are the traps of physicality, whether it's the outer world or the thought forms in our inner world, that we can become overly identified with and actually like convince ourselves that that is reality as we know it. That it creates a limitation, right? And we forget that there was something that came before it. And so suddenly we're over-identified with who we think we are and how we think the world works and our stories about reality. All of it has shaped and taken on a form that then we perpetuate in how we navigate the world. Because those thought forms, this isn't abstract. Like, those thought forms that we're identified with, we project outwardly, and that creates our reality as we know it. And so when we understand the technology of the mind and these different dimensions of consciousness, we can start to play with them and realize that they're more malleable than we often think they are. Because the illusion, the great forgetting, is that we identify with the forms. We move into a place of concealment, when the truth of the matter is actually that those forms are all the many shattered pieces of the one. They're all projections into the field, and that which is beyond it is actually the truth, right? So I'm giving like a ridiculous cliff notes of like, in some ways trying to distill it into this riffing is bastardizing it, honestly, but these are the themes that have been coming up. And so whether or not any of that made sense to you, the thing that I want to share as a takeaway is that when I talk about my sense that the field is changing, there's a very, very subtle layer, and maybe you can feel it as you listen. Like, drop all the words for a second and try to actually feel into the field of reality. Beyond understanding it, beyond conceptualizing it, right? Because the first jump of the mind, of the ahamkara, I am the doer, is to try to identify with a sense-making faculty. To say like, oh, this is what's happening. That right there is the moment we start to create a trap, where we think we understand, and so we draw a line around it with our mind, right? And so what I find so beautiful often is that when we actually drop into the body and the felt sense, the experiential reality, we can interface with the mystery without needing to conceptualize it. We can just be in the feeling tone of what's happening. And so there's something shifting. I want to get into like the real heart of the message now. There's something shifting in the very, very subtle octave of reality as we know it, the unmanifest, the sea of pure potential, pre-conceptual, right? And I have also the feeling that it is actually the planetary powers themselves that exist in this kind of karmic arena that are shifting the conditions. And so as they continue to shift, and as we know, so many of the planets just moved into new sign territories, so many of them just moved into new areas of the field and are activating different things, different frequencies, different karmas, different conditions, right? And that's happening at a level, at least in my felt sense, beyond cognition, beyond us knowing or really understanding what is changing in the field. But the sense is that something's shifting, right? And so as that very, very subtle change is occurring in the, like, I'll say it again, but it's because there's not a better word for it, like the most subtle dimension of reality, it starts to then contract and create change all the way down into the most dense layers of reality. And the moment those changes in the field interface with our mind, interface with the imaginal faculties of mind. I'm not talking about intellect, right? I'm talking about the actual field of our awareness. As those changes start to contract and interface with the field of our awareness, they start to implant different ideas. There's an impression created. And that starts to shift how we're perceiving, experiencing, and understanding reality as we know it. And it starts to actually shapeshift the ahamkara, the ego. And so what this looks like in a more maybe practical sense is that we're no longer so overly identified with the way things have been. There's an impression, there's an influence moving from the most subtle into the most dense, and the first thing that interfaces with is our field of awareness. So we start to feel, sense, experience the world a little differently. This is what I'm saying. I wonder if you can sense this in your own lived experience, if you really drop out of the mind for a moment and sense into the field as it changes around you. And this happens at very like metaphysical layers, but also when I say metaphysical, it's like it's happening in the field of consciousness in ways that like we can kind of get at with the mind. But it also then starts to, as it drops down a few octaves, influence the relational field. How consciousness is interfacing with itself through our interactions with the world around us. And then it starts to drop in even deeper into our own thoughts, beliefs, mentality about how things are going. And in that case too, our own visioning capacities, our own imagination, right? The imaginal is where the field of our awareness starts to be able to interact with unmanifest and project vision into the field. We receive ideas from preconceptual that drop into the conceptual through the faculty of our imagination, and there is where we get to actually start to participate with them. And that faculty of our imagination is what literally allows us to create a different world, or like participate in shape-shifting with the field. right? So all these different trickle-down effects are occurring. And then as it drops in even further into specifically like the layer of the ahamkara, the ego that's wanting to identify with a self-concept, with something, it's like that starts to shift. And then our very understanding of who we are and the thoughts and patterns that we play out are changing also. This might sound so wacky. Try not to like grasp at it. That's my sense of whatever this is, right? It's actually by its very nature, it's like not meant to be grasped at. It's meant to be experienced. And beyond all the words, it's like feel that dropping in and the way it's reshaping the movements and currents that run through the collective body, right? It's not abstract that what's happening inside the microcosm of our own quote-unquote individual experience is sending ripples out into the entire web around us, and vice versa. The ripples in the web then shape us. We're constantly moving and being moved by these subtle currents and pattern changes in the field of consciousness, right? And that then, from a subtle level, expresses at a dense level in changing reality, quite literally. And it's so much of it, what I'm really getting at here is our mind is the interface between unmanifest and manifest reality. And so if we're really paying attention to the subtle currents of the mind, we're actually tapping into that antenna that's able to interface between the two, between the individual and the collective, between the manifest and unmanifest, material and more like, I'll say, ethereal reality, speaking to those most subtle layers. And so the message that led to this kind of domino effect when I sat down this morning in divination was this interesting, I actually was like trying to tap into Venus a little bit. And it's interesting to me that so much of this insight actually came through Venus, like as I was grounding in, right? And the message was so like, it was so like kind of pokey, you know? It had like a little smirk to it, but it was very plain. And this was a message for me, but also just for the collective as I relate to it. It was a past version of yourself, like not too long ago. We even could think of it as soon as yesterday, would be having a completely different experience to what is going on right now. And in that, I felt this like, this feeling tone of fear and panic and overwhelm and like identifying with the way we thought things were going to go. And so now that things are going in a totally unpredictable fashion, it's like the woe is me, the drama, the like, oh my God. I mean, these are things that I have said over the past few months. Is like, when I was a little kid, I didn't expect to be in this version of reality. I didn't think this is how it was going to go, you know, and right in there, I'm identified with a way I thought things were going to go. And so the dissonance and the differentiation causes stress and strain for my ego that was invested and identified with a certain self-concept that had a certain trajectory. And so my point here is like this little pokiness of like of a past version of yourself, even as recently as yesterday, would be looking at the state of things and freaking out and being total victim of it, being all like dramatic, oh, woe is me, grasping my pearls, like, oh my God, I can't believe this is what's going on. And it was this other shift, like, and today you woke up and you could believe it. Which maybe that's not true for you. And I don't know if it's totally true for me, right? It's not as literal as the message itself sounds. But there's something in there that's like, yesterday you were looking at the conditions of what's going on and you were freaking the fuck out. You couldn't handle it. It was overwhelming your system and all the identifications you had with how you understood reality to be. And today you woke up and you could believe it. You could meet the conditions as they were. And the space between those two responses is no longer being so identified with this other version of self and their relationship to reality. It's being able to drop the narrative and shift gears into one that's actually just meeting the world as it is. And I cannot overemphasize how much is actually happening between those two responses to the world. It might, and this is something that I, even calling myself out here, but I see it a lot in New Age spirituality, where it's just kind of this like sentiment of like, tomorrow you can wake up and choose a new story. And I'm saying shit like this all the time, but it's really not so simple, right? Like, there's so many layers of identification that we have with a certain narrative and our participation in it, and who we have to be in our own story to show up in the world in that way. That's a lot of work to shed those layers of identification and just wake up the next day, shift gears into a new story. So this is no simple thing. This, like, today you woke up and you were able to meet the world as it is. You were able to believe it. There has to be such an internal shift. So much disidentification that is required to actually meet the world, like, heart first in many ways, not head first. Because when we're that's the thing. Okay, I understand now. Yeah, it's like when we're meeting the world head first, there are so many layers of occlusion. There are so many identities and stories that we have to try to, like, trudge through, because our ideas about the world are actually what don't allow us to see it for what it is, right? There's so many filters and lenses. It's so dense. It's so thick. Again, yes, I'm understanding now too. It's like the emphasis on the density of our mind, which is so funny because that's such an old-fashioned burn, like to call someone dense, you know? Yeah, that's funny. So now I understand, like, actively. That's why I'm like, oh, okay, why, when I was connecting with Venus, this is the message that came through, right? And the real heart of it, no pun intended, is like, it's a different thing to meet the world heart first. And now it's making sense to me why during my divination this morning, the element of gold came up, which, alchemically speaking, gold has a lot to do with the heart. It has a lot to do with the sun. Venus just entered Leo, and I didn't fully get it, but now that it's like, if we actually drop into the heart, we are accessing the deep place. We're accessing the inner voice, or what my teacher would call, like, the voice of Guru, right? The voice of the teacher within. I've spoken about this in past years, but if anyone has read the Bhagavad Gita, the conversation that's happening between Arjuna and Krishna as they're moving through the battlefield, right? That conversation is not actually Arjuna talking to something outside of him. Krishna didn't manifest necessarily as this external entity or an emanation, an avatar of God. The voice of Krishna was coming from within Arjuna. That guidance from within, that voice from within. That's how my teacher taught me about this story. Maybe you've related with it differently. I'm not saying there's a right way. That defeats the whole point. But the heart of it is like, that voice, that's the voice, that's the gold, the source of gold within. It's the thing deeper than the mind, the ego, the identity, which is so fickle and so tricky and really just a projection. And that's where the illusion actually is, right? We might think of it as the soul, which is a funny thing, because when we say the soul, like, what do we really mean? It's very abstract. But it's our closest word, right? It's our closest conceptual form to get at that eternal source within all of us, each of us, all things, right? And so bringing it full circle in spiral speak here, actually being able to drop into the heart and how we're experiencing the field changing and our interfacing with it, to be able to wake up and just meet the world as it is, it requires that we drop into the deep self with a capital S. It requires that we drop into that eternal place within. I'm thinking of a song by, I'm not going to remember it, but if I think of it, I'll post it in the show notes. But to a lot of the divination, there was so much Mercury energy, which makes good sense to me now. So much of this shapeshifter magic and portal jumping, time bending. And when I talk about Mercury, so much of it is beyond the intellect. I think that there can be a kind of face value association with Mercury as the mind, and I'll say mind with like a lowercase m, the intellectual faculty of mind, when really Mercury is the one that allows us to open the doors to mind with a capital M, and like the projection field and the faculties of our imagination and how it's interfacing with preconceptual reality, right? Mercury is the one that can move between the worlds, the messenger, right? Mercury is not just stuck within this one. Mercury is the faculty that allows us to move between most subtle to most dense, unmanifest to manifest, right? That's the actual function of the messenger. So it makes good sense to me now that it's like, okay, lots of this mercurial magic. But one thing I do want to note before I just talk about kind of the play-by-play of the astrology here, something that came up at the very beginning of my divination. Wow, yeah. I'll say this in the way it came through. And the sense of it was that you, which means each of us, which means all things, you made an agreement before you took form, in time beyond time. You made a vow, and the records of those vows live in the heart. Like there's a ring over which you took an oath inside the heart itself. And that is not meant to be bondage. That's not the way it came through. It's not meant to be a burden. Although it can feel quite burdensome. And the sense that I got, and I wonder again just how much Venus and Leo is bringing this. I just feel her like pulling at the threads this week. The threads of time, the different like expanded dimensions of time beyond this one, which is again the trappings of like singularity. We think that reality as we can see and touch it in form is all there is, right? Last summer I was doing a long 40-day sadhana, and I was meditating on each of the elements. And as I was meditating on a crystal to just represent the earth element, something super solid as we perceive it, the message that came through is that Earth, like as the elemental, as the most dense, Earth is God's greatest magic trick, right? And for me also, Earth exists within the contracted state of linear time. That the sun will rise tomorrow morning and it will set, and there is this rhythm and pace set in motion, even though really time is much more of a circle than it is a line. But when we think about maybe even the principles of Saturn, right, as the Lord of Time, as the container for our particular solar system, as the thing that gives form, you know, it all comes into the fold of like, oh, all of that is the divine's greatest magic trick. That the design is so immaculate to live in time, to live in form, that we forget our true nature. And we're trapped in this illusion. I'll say it. Right? And so there was this sense in the divination coming full circle around this vow that lives in the heart that Venus is bringing in many ways, or at least tugging at, where time expands into all the different dimensionalities. It's no longer just linear time, space right here and now. It's also like all these different octaves. And we might think of this as like soul records, right? This is something that it goes in line with a question that people ask me quite often as a kind of example here, right? I do a lot of ancestor work. And a question that I get often is like, okay, yes, I understand you're connecting with lineage. And lineage in ancestry, as we understand it, often feels very linear. It's like, okay, generations that exist in a timeline in this way, right? And people are like, what about past lives? Like, I have all these memories, or I've done Akashic record, like I have all these experiences of other lifetimes where I wasn't, in an Irish body. I was in these different bodies and lineages and whatever else, right? How do you reconcile that? And for me, without going, this is quite amusing today, y'all. Bear with me here, but far out. There's a Mongolian, Siberian, is it Siberian? Shiringaral is her name. I forget if she's from Mongolian or Siberian lineage of shamanism. But she talks about the 3 different dimensions of the soul. And that one of them exists in time in regards to ancestral lineage and has that inheritance of the memory of the bloodline, right? But another part of the soul exists beyond linear time. It exists in like time beyond time, kairos, right? It's the part of the soul that carries memory from, could be the past, could be the future, could be just a totally different parallel experience at present. It gets very abstract, or I should say, like far out. It gets very meta very quickly when you ponder that, right? And then there's another that just belongs to the earth and the land itself, the body as an emanation of the land. And I understand too that the part of the soul that exists in kairos, in this kind of like time beyond time space, also could have this kind of celestial origin, right? It's beyond just the earthly. And yeah, I'll link Sarangaral's work because I also just don't want to butcher her work and her wisdom. She has some great books if you're interested in learning more there. But that's how I reckon with this. Is like there's so many octaves. And I don't always find it helpful, if I'm being honest with you, as a person who is kind of too far out most of the time. It's like it's been really grounding for me to exist in lineage time, right? In like generational time. It's helped me reconcile with existing on Earth in a body, But I felt a poke in the reading this week from, I'm going to accredit it to Venus because that feels like who it came through. around just touching in with Kairos for a moment, just fathoming as a way of meeting the moment as it is, as a way of being able to wake up and believe things as they are, right? And belief is a tricky word, but the heart of it is like to interface with reality as it is and simply exist in that, participate in that, not wish it differently, not cling to some other idea of how you thought this all was going to go. It's like, oh, okay, this is how things are. This is how the field is. How do I want to meet that, right? There's so much, God, I feel so much freedom in my chest. Just like, letting it be as it is. And that's not to bypass, that's not to have this weird, like, disassociative quality. But for me, it's the question of, like, what opens up when we stop wishing things differently? What opens up when we just consider for a moment even meeting reality as it is? Because the field is changing. And so it's like we also need to be able to update and reattune, like recalibrate ourselves to the way things are now. I think that's also the heart of the message, that was like a past version of yourself, even as recent as yesterday. Like, that's how quickly things are changing, right? Damn, if you really think about that. A past version of yourself, even as recent as yesterday, would be freaking out and thrashing and like beating themselves against the conditions of reality. And yet, whoa, okay, things have shifted. We wake up and now we're able to meet. And things have shifted inside of ourselves. There's been maybe an unburdening or a disidentification with the way things were, or how we thought they were going to be, that'll freeze up the space internally to meet the moment. But then there's also the pivot of like, and the field itself is changing. Again, we're being moved by and moving, participating in this dialogue, this call and response constantly. And so this nudge from Venus is like, recognize that you signed up for this. And I'm so sensitive to how almost like insensitive that statement can be right now for people that are like I can't say that and also hold the reality of what's happening in Lebanon right now, for example, right? Like there's I come in and out of the real humanness of life on Earth, and it's like, damn, that is a shitty statement if we really want to put it in that dimension of reality. But for a moment, it's like, okay, just come up. I feel that. It's hard for me. I'm very resistant to it, if I'm being honest with you. I'm very resistant to like coming up an octave and being in a bit of like disidentification with what is happening and the suffering on the planet, right? This is where the wisdom traditions can be so helpful to like grow around the suffering and not just disassociate from it, but also not like over identify with it. Because if we let ourselves fall into the immensity of suffering that's occurring on Earth right now, like we will never be able to metabolize that. So this is the space between, right? That's what I'm speaking to, is like there's a space between disassociating and then just like drowning in it, where something opens, and the invitation is to say like, come up for air for a moment. And remember that there's a ring in your heart upon which, at a soul level, at a level that we don't even really have full access to conceptually, you took a vow over that. You made an oath. And that ring lives in your chest. It lives in your heart. It's part of the machinations of the soul, as I understand it. There are impressions, there are contracts, there are karmas associated with this. Remember that that is what is going on. And everything happening in the field right now, everything happening in reality as we know it is part of that agreement. I'm just letting myself actually feel that. Because when we over-identify with what's happening out there or in here as an individual, as separate, it's like we so quickly lose the plot. We so quickly forget that as within, so without, these karmas are bound to one another. They are part of the same thing. What's happening outside is happening inside, and vice versa. And so I feel this invitation to almost like remember and then participate in that a little bit more intentionally. And it asks that we step out of linear time and who we think we are and all these bindings, to actually sense these agreements we made within our own soul and then within the soul of the world. That's what I'm seeing right now, is like there's also a heart, like the world's heart also contains that same ring with those agreements. And the one in our own hearts is a mirror for that. It's the microcosm of the macrocosm. And they're connected to each other. Like the ring in our quote-unquote individual soul is connected to the ring in the world's heart, or in the world soul, right? The collective soul. So that's going to mean whatever it means to each of us. That's the miracle of multiplicity, the one in the many and the many in the one. All shattered pieces of the one mirror, right? And so the way the fractal nature of it ripples out through the multitude of expressions, cast upon the thousand forms, as one of my teachers from the Qigong tradition says. It's like that multiplicity has a prismatic nature. It has like this fractal nature where each of us and like the ring, the agreement that we carry in our own soul has very particular karmas. I'm not saying that everyone has the same thing going on here. It's the opposite, so far from the truth, but in many ways it's also the truth. Like, how do I reconcile this? I don't have an answer to this, but it is something that I think about every day. How do I reconcile that there are oaths, there are agreements, there are karmas that I carry at a soul level, and the planets are somehow in this miraculous expression of creation, somehow the planets are also participating in this. Like, the more that I've gotten into astrology over the years, and the more that I've like released my ideas about astrology and actually just interfaced with the planets directly, it's like, wow, each of you hold different pieces of the one. Each of you hold different fractal expressions of consciousness that you're pulling at, you're tugging at in each of us. All, prismatic in nature. But how do I reconcile that as an individual who has these particular karmas? And then, of course, the world itself is this like massive karmic arena where all of these intersecting threads create the web itself. And there are family members of mine in Lebanon right now that are experiencing totally different karmas, right? I mean, that to me is like, that's the lifelong question. I don't have an answer. But it also requires that we stay with it. And that's what I'm feeling even called out in my own regard here, where it's like, you got to stay with that. Because if you collapse into like not even abandoning, I don't think that's possible. It's like denying or disowning or even in some ways victimizing your own karmas to try to reconcile with the karmas of your family members in Lebanon, like That's not, you're taking on their karma, but it doesn't really work because you're not in Lebanon right now. So at the same time, there's an invitation to like be where you're at and pay attention to like what are the agreements that you carry in your own soul as part of this emanation of the one. They have different facets and expressions of that. And that invitation to be where you're at is also, I'm getting now, it's like, oh, that's part of like, today I woke up and I was able to meet the world as it is. I'm not trying to wish it differently. I'm not doing the comparative suffering thing in regards to the karmic web, right? Because then we get entangled in things that actually don't allow us to participate with where we're at, with our own interface between the individual and the collective in our unique vantage point of it, right? I hope any of this is making sense. Maybe it's not supposed to make sense. I swear, too, for anyone wondering, I'm completely sober. Yeah. So I want to talk about the play-by-play of the astrology because I think that will help us also maybe ground the plane a bit here. And as I mentioned, like, I do feel so much of this has to do with the opening aspects between Venus and these other planets. Now, Venus just entered Leo over the weekend, so very, very early degrees of a fire sign. Now, what do we know about where everything's at right now? A lot of the big planetary powers that, if you've been here for a while, especially since the beginning of the year, my understanding from them is that the bigger outer planets, those powers are like what is really shifting the karmic arena at a more subtle or meta level. And then the inner planets, the personal planets that move quicker, are then helping us engage and interface with the karmic conditions at hand, right? And that is like so much of how I experience Venus and Mars and the moon and even Mercury, these inner planets, right? And I would say the sun too, but the sun has more of this like soul level quality, that which illuminates, right? These other inner planets have this participatory quality, but also have this like embodied felt sense quality, where they're informing how we're experiencing the relational field at a somatic level, at a thought form level, at this kind of like individual interfacing with the collective, right? So they're a little bit more on the ground is what I'm saying. They're on the ground with us. And Venus especially has so much to do with the sensibility of the heart as a kind of filter of impression, as a kind of, what's coming is almost like a divination tool, right? It's like Venus is what allows us to navigate the world from a place of response at this kind of intuitive or instinctual level. It's like a divination tool. And it's divining the relational field. It's divining amongst the web of relations and helping us navigate that. And not just relations with other humans, obviously. We're relating to everything all the time. That web is where all of these different currents of karma run through the collective body, right? And so much of that it's energetic, it's subtle, but it's happening between things all the time. It's happening in your experience of, I'm thinking about like the baby deer that have been running around our land here. You know, there's so many different dimensions of relationship occurring between the land and the deer and me, etc. Yeah, so that. Venus is helping us to divine how we're navigating the relational field by sensing into it, those subtle currents that are in many ways beneath the mind. It's about receptivity and response to the world around us. And so Venus in a new territory, specifically in Leo, which rules the heart. It's the solar chamber. And so much of Leo as the only planet ruled by the sun goes back to what I was talking about, in regards to the heart, and regards to gold and the voice of the soul, these emanations of reality. It's very, Leo as the solar ruled territory is, I always picture it like the Leo part of our chart, right? Is where the light of the sun, no matter where the sun is or where the sun was when we were born, natally speaking, the Leo house is transmitting the light of the sun directly into that territory of our life. It's a prism, right? So with Venus in this territory, that prism lives in the heart. It's really like dropping us into the heart to transmit from there. So I think the real thing that I want to say is like, this isn't just about romance. If you're really listening, it's like, it's all about romance. Everything is romance. And it's not about romance in the way that we conventionally consider, right? Maybe I didn't need to say that, but I said it. So on Monday, I'm going to now ground it in the play-by-play. Monday, Venus has an opening sextile with Uranus, freshly in Gemini. So Venus and the sky god, the one who brings unmanifest reality into divine realization, I'll say, right? That's what Uranus is doing. It's bringing this state of pure potential as the sky god, right? Sky god really being a murti, an image for the sea of pure awareness, unmanifest reality, right? Not yet in any form, not even in thought form. And Uranus brings those big, vast potential visions, realities into form as these kind of eureka moments, as these aha moments. And that right there is where something moves from preconceptual to conceptual. We get an idea, we get a vision, we get an image in the receptacle, literally, of our mind. It's like the antenna, right? Something hits the antenna of mind, of our own individual field of awareness, the buddhi, right? And then we start to be able to give it form through ideas, through language, through conceptualizing it. So with Venus pinging Uranus first, that's where this dialogue is happening between the field and the heart. And this is where, too, I feel it's like not trying to interface head first right now, but heart first. That's the divination tool, right? That's Monday. I just love going too far out and then being like, that's a Monday. It's all just like, you gotta laugh at it. So then Tuesday, Neptune and Venus come into a trine, because Neptune is, of course, in the very early degrees of Aries, fire sign, and then Venus is moving deeper into the early degrees of Leo. And so this brings something else. And what I think is interesting is that where Uranus goes far out to suddenly in, right? Uranus is bringing this vastness into form. Neptune does the opposite. Austin Coppock explained it in this way, and it just like finally made sense to me. That these two bigger planetary powers are working in this realm of consciousness from unmanifest to manifest, but they're moving in different ways. Uranus is bringing something from unmanifest into manifest reality, and Neptune, as the dissolver, is bringing that which is perceived as manifest, right? The space between the atoms in everything that we perceive as material form. Neptune is like, oh, we're going to dissolve those bounds. We're going to actually help you remember the reality as it is. So we have this like expansion contraction thing happening in the beginning of the week, and so much of it takes place in the heart with Venus here. That's the interface. Is like, stay with it, stay in the heart, try to actually like feel what's going on. There's energy from out coming in, there's energy from in coming out. It's like the breaths of the Great Mother. And I actually feel, in a way, there's an opportunity to like be inspired. I mean that literally, but also in the way inspired means like to be breathed into. Like to become the flute through which creative energy is able to play and sing through you. There's some kind of like hollow bone aspect available to us if we actually like participate in this, if we give ourselves room to breathe. My teacher, Dr. Laud, has been coming up a lot in this reading. I'm like, he's just, so much of what I'm sharing is from his teachings, right? And I will always remember, it's gonna make me cry. I will always remember when he first shared a teaching on the breath. And he was talking about kumbhak, which are breath retentions, right? Holding. And he was guiding us through a breathing exercise where at the top of the breath, he would invite us to hold and just wait and see if we could sense the divine in between the breaths themselves. Like in that hang time between inhales and exhales is where everything exists. And so Uranus and Neptune, the inhale and the exhale. It's so beautiful. Wow. And it's all in the heart, right? So that's Tuesday. And on Wednesday, Venus is going to oppose Pluto. That feels intense. It feels revelatory. It feels like what actually comes to us at the top of the breath, right? Between inhale and exhale. For me, Pluto is less, lately I feel Pluto less of like a bringing us into the underworld, great revealer, brr, you know, like yes, there is this intensity and grit to it. We know that. But when we simply just like think about or consider Pluto as revelatory, to reveal something. So much of the interplay of reality is a dance of revealment and concealment. The unveiling, right? The pulling back the veil of illusion, material reality, however we want to talk about it, because talking about it by its very nature is a part of the concealment, right? That revealment, that revelatory quality of Pluto, to me goes beyond the like cultural apocalypse thing that everybody's on about, myself included, right? There's actually something so powerful here that feels like the true nature of revelation, that is like earth-shattering, that is total obliteration, right? Specifically the obliteration of the ego. And this is where it's like all your ideas of who you thought you were and how all of this works needs to, at a certain point, be dropped so you can meet things as they are. And it's just beyond the bounds of all of your identifications. The card that I pulled, I knew that I could fucking feel it, that one of the faces of the Great Mother, one of the faces of Kali Ma specifically, was going to come up this week. And I didn't really have a reason why, but, feeling Venus opposing Pluto gives me a little more context. Because, too, I'll show this, if you're watching on YouTube, the death card in my tarot deck is Chinnamasta, who cuts off her own head, which is, of course, a metaphor, as these murtis are. There's so much symbolism here, but it's cutting off the ego, the mind with a lowercase m that identifies with manifest reality, that identifies with the illusion of the physical world, the thought forms, everything. Off with your head, right? Off with your head. That's the theme of this week. But the heart of that too is like, who are you? Capital, who are you? Beyond all of those identities. And it's not about going up and out, right? If you notice the images of the murtis without a head, what is left is the body. What is left is actually the vessel for the soul. The heart is still intact, right? So for me, it's like, it's not about transcending, getting up and out. It's not about, when we say going beyond the mind, right? There's a maybe consciousness, a dimension of consciousness that we're moving towards or accessing, but really in some ways it's going beneath the mind. All of the chitta vrittis, this is something that Dr. Lad used to draw, like all of the chitta vrittis, the little thought forms, the noise of the mind, the monkey mind, right, on the surface of consciousness. Conscious, like, the monkey mind, right? It's actually about dropping deeper into the waters of the psyche, like going beneath the chitta vrittis until we reach the fully present, unmoving depth of what is actually there, like the deep self with a capital S. That's where the truth, capital T, is. Again, it's like being able to hear the voice of Krishna from within, the inner guidance, the voice of the soul, this sort of thing. And so I feel like when I talk about total obliteration, that can sound violent or overwhelming, but the truth of it is like being able to actually drop down below and access the unstruck sound, anahata, right? The heart. So much, just acknowledgement, I feel, to the Vedic ancestors and lineage of tradition for offering their wisdom to help us understand, quote unquote, how all this works, which is a paradox in and of itself to say that. But so Wednesday, Venus opposes Pluto, and that's where I feel it's like that's the space between the inhale and the exhale. That's where something is revealed, whether it be internally, whether it be externally. Maybe it's a bit of both, of course, in this thread around the field of reality as we know it, the one in the many, and the many in the one. So the other thing to talk about is, of course, Chiron entering Taurus. This is going to be a long one. I'm going to just give you fair warning because we haven't even touched on Chiron and Taurus yet. It's been a while since I went off this much. But yeah, when does Chiron square Venus actually? I don't think that'll happen. So on Friday, Venus Day, a long-awaited transit ingress occurs. And I might talk about this more next week because the thing that I've learned about Chiron is so much of it is experiential. so much of it is like in the deep tenderness of our own humanity that we really come to know the wounded healer. But it is worth noting that for the past like 7 years, Chiron has been moving through Aries. And it's been rough, I would say. Like there's been a lot of aspects, there's been a lot of agitation, there's like been a lot of salt in the wound, I feel, with Chiron moving through Aries, both at like a collective but also a personal level for all of us. I'll speak for myself. I noticed that Chiron and Aries, again, both within and without, like the defensiveness, the pain body, good Lord, the pain body was so close to the surface. The triggers, the reaction, the protectors, right? Like it created inflammation in the pain body, both collectively and individually. And so I feel curious. I mean, I feel also the medicine, of course, of Chiron in Aries has been like really helping us learn how to how to assert ourselves, how to say and find our no and stand behind it, right? To actually be able to wield the energy of Mars, right, as the ruler of Aries, to individuate, to set boundaries, to maintain sovereignty over oneself. Like there have been so many important teachings. Like consider for a moment over the past 7 years how much you were able to find your fire within, to find your no, to find your ability to stand behind and uphold the boundaries you set in place to protect your own sovereignty. And of course, the other side of that has been a lot of defensiveness, a lot of violence, a lot of reactivity in the field. That's just been like a little much, you know, a lot. So both and, always. I feel that we're ready for a balm, right? It's like, okay, I'm picturing like a rug burn. I'm picturing like spicy, agitated skin, like red rash, right? And then actually being able to like pat some dirt and water over that, like give it a balm, give it a, something to like cool it down a bit. But also, again, of course, to bring us back into our hearts. Because the thing about all of that rage and reactivity is that it's usually a defense mechanism, often a helpful one, but that underneath the rage and reactivity is often a lot of grief and tenderness that we're defending, that we're protecting, right? It's like we're protecting our own humanity. And so with Chiron entering Taurus, I've been very curious about how it shifts things into the heart a little bit, right? We're moving from the realm of Mars into the realm of Venus with Chiron ingressing into Taurus here. And so, there's so much to this. I do think I want to spend some more time next week talking about it at length and feeling it a bit deeper. But, a lot of the curiosities I have, I'll say, because you can never really know for sure, especially with Chiron. It does make me wonder about collective wounds around food insecurity, financial insecurity. This is Taurus. This is about resources. And those resources can be very literal in this case, but they can also be, the needs for safety at a psychological level. Like scarcity is not only ever, scarcity is very psychological, is what I'm getting at. You can have everything that you need, but if you have these scarcity narratives embedded within you from empire especially, you're going to begin to hoard resources. And greed is going to become more of a thing. And we see that even with millionaires who it's like, don't y'all have enough, right? Scarcity is psychological. It's not about what you do or don't have on paper. It's about what your nervous system is experiencing. And that's where it often contributes to imbalance of resources, to unequal distribution of resource, and greed and hoarding, and all the things that we see rampant in the world right now. So I'm thinking about Chiron in Taurus just for a few months. This is just the sneak preview. It's going to retrograde later next month and move back into Aries for its final kind of rodeo there. But it's giving us a little taste, right, of what's in store. And I just feel so strongly that it is going to bring us directly into engaging with those fault lines around scarcity and hoarding and greed and an unequal distribution of resources, which is, of course, rooted in racism and economic supremacy. There's so much there. I feel like I have given y'all a big enough bite, so I'll talk more about that next week. But there's so much there. And I feel it's the invitation to just pay close attention to what even happens amongst the economic sphere over the next few weeks. More on that next week. I think that's all I want to share for now. I mean, so much of what's happening here is Venus related, and I've exhausted my words. The rest is for you to feel. See you next week. And I want to say it. I'm going to say it one more time because I'm not very good at promoting my work. Well, yeah. I'm shy about it. I'm also stubborn about it because I like these transmissions on my work to just be my work, and sometimes it feels edgy for me to like bring in the other things that I'm doing, but it does apply here if you like what I'm doing. If you're into how I do astrology. My relationship to it, my transmission of it, right? Every diviner is so uniquely different and beautiful in their own gifts. But if you are interested in learning with me how to access your own gifts in that regard, I am opening the next cohort of live group mentorship. And I would love for folks who have, I'm just really interested in the communal wisdom of it. Like folks who have big ideas of astrology, how they want to use it in the world to engage with culture. So much of the conversation is going to be around like, how do we really steward this study in service of the world that we want to be participating in, right? Which for me means like, how do we not just perpetuate colonial narratives in our interpretations? There's plenty of that, right? But that also requires us to drop into a more living relationship with the planets as wisdom keepers and our own ancestors that we inherited the world from, and relating to the world and culture as we know it with the ethic that things can change. And I really do believe that this study, this framework and tradition offers us a map if we're willing to get creative with it and question it, especially questioning the history of this framework as a tool that was used for the ruling class and for empire, but also as a tool whose origins are actually in a deeply rich animist relationship with earth and sky. So both, right? We're following the thread back through time so we can actually then trace it through the future in a more informed way and not just regurgitate information. I'm really not interested in that in astrology at this point. We have enough of that, So I'll leave it there. All the details are below as usual. But be well, my friends, and we'll see you next week for not yet the full moon, but definitely for some other things. So take good care.